This remarkable story centers on one of aviation history's most extraordinary recovery operations, the discovery and retrieval of Glacier Girl, a P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft that was buried beneath 264 feet of Greenland ice for 50 years. When recovery teams finally reached the aircraft in 1992, they made an astonishing discovery. The keys to the cockpit canopy were still inside, exactly where pilot Lieutenant Harry Smith had tossed them before abandoning his aircraft on July 15, 1942. Along with the keys, the team found Smith's checklist, flight manual, tobacco tin, and flak helmet, all perfectly preserved in the frozen cockpit, creating a time capsule from World War II. On July 15, 1942, 8 American warplanes, 6 P-38 Lightning fighters from the 94th Fighter Squadron, and 2 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers took off from Presque Isle Air Base in Maine on a critical mission to ferry aircraft to British airfields as part of Operation Bolero. The squadron was commanded by Colonel Carl Rudder and included 25 crew members in total. Their route would take them across the treacherous North Atlantic via Newfoundland, Greenland, Iceland, and finally to Scotland. However, fate intervened when the squadron encountered a massive blizzard over Iceland. With their planned refueling stop in Iceland socked in by weather, the pilots were forced to turn back toward Greenland. As they approached their intended landing site in Greenland, they discovered it was also closed due to weather conditions. With fuel running critically low and no viable alternatives, the pilots faced an impossible situation. They would have to attempt emergency landings on the vast Greenland ice cap. The emergency landing sequence began with P-38 pilot Brad McManus, who was lowest on fuel. Attempting to preserve his aircraft, McManus tried a wheels-down landing on what appeared to be firm ice. However, his nose wheel hit a hidden crevasse, causing his P-38 to flip upside down. Fortunately, McManus survived with only minor injuries, cushioned by the snow that had accumulated around his inverted cockpit. Witnessing McManus's crash, the remaining 5 P-38 pilots opted for safer belly landings with their landing gear retracted. Lieutenant Harry Smith was the last P-38 to touch down. Demonstrating exceptional pilot skill even in crisis, Smith feathered his propellers before landing to prevent damage, a decision that would prove crucial 50 years later. Before sprinting off to join his fellow airmen, Smith performed a methodical shutdown of his aircraft, removing his helmet and parachute, and casually tossing the cockpit canopy keys inside the cockpit. This seemingly insignificant act would become one of the most poignant symbols of the entire saga. For 9 days, the 25 stranded airmen endured the harsh Arctic conditions while awaiting rescue. They took shelter primarily in the 2 B-17 bombers, which provided relative comfort compared to the smaller P-38 cockpits. The crew had adequate supplies, including food and even a case of contraband whiskey that proved valuable for morale during their ordeal. 3 days into their predicament, radio operators finally established contact with their base, confirming their position and condition. Several supply drops were attempted, though the first 2 were lost when parachutes were caught by high winds across the flat ice expanse. The stranded pilots learned to quickly secure subsequent supply drops before they could blow away. On July 24, 1942, 9 days after the emergency landing, salvation appeared on the horizon in the form of a dog sled rescue team. Before departing their aircraft forever, the airmen collected their personal belongings and destroyed sensitive equipment to prevent enemy capture, with some crew members riddling electronics with bullets from their service pistols. Smith himself shot his top-secret identification friend or foe, IFF radio equipment full of holes with his .45 caliber pistol. The rescue operation required an arduous 10-mile trek through knee-deep snow, navigating around dangerous crevasses, before the group finally reached the southeast coast of Greenland. There, a Coast Guard cutter waited to transport them to safety. All 25 men survived without serious injury, a remarkable outcome given the circumstances. The 8 abandoned aircraft were left behind on the ice, where they would gradually disappear beneath accumulating snow and ice. For nearly 4 decades, the Lost Squadron remained largely forgotten, buried beneath the ever-accumulating Greenland ice. The legend of pristine warbirds just beneath the snow occasionally surfaced in aviation circles, but no serious recovery attempts were made until the late 1970s. The modern search began somewhat serendipitously in 1978 when Atlanta businessman Pat Epps, son of Georgia aviation pioneer Ben Epps, encountered Roy Deegan, an airline pilot who had heard the Lost Squadron story from original pilot Carl Rudder. When a wealthy aviator mentioned to Epps that he would like to buy a P-38, Epps suddenly saw potential in the Greenland aircraft. In 1980, Epps partnered with architect and pilot Richard Taylor to form what would become the Greenland Expedition Society. Their initial optimism was comically misguided. "Our thoughts were that the tails would be sticking out of the snow," Taylor later recalled with a grin. "We'd sweep snow off the wings and shovel them out a little bit, crank the planes up and fly them home." Of course, it didn't happen. When the first expedition reached the recorded coordinates in 1981, they found nothing but featureless ice. Between 1981 and 1992, 13 separate expeditions attempted to locate and recover the Lost Squadron. The breakthrough came in 1988 when the team arrived armed with sophisticated subsurface radar systems and trained operators. Within days, the radar teams had pinpointed the exact locations of all 8 aircraft. The discovery was both exciting and sobering. The planes had moved approximately 2 miles from their original landing site due to glacier flow, and they now lay beneath an astounding 264 feet of solid ice. The engineering challenge of extracting an aircraft from 264 feet beneath solid ice required unprecedented innovation. The solution came from an eclectic group of investors and volunteers assembled by Epps and Taylor. Don Brooks, owner of auto parts shops and an air compressor company, developed the original concept for melting a shaft through the ice. His company built the first thermal meltdown generator, dubbed the Gopher. The device was later improved by expedition member Bobby Bailey, owner of a compressor remanufacturing factory, who designed and fabricated the enhanced Super Gopher. This 550-pound cone-shaped device resembled a missile nose cone and was wrapped with copper tubing through which hot liquid circulated. The Super Gopher could melt a 4-foot diameter shaft at a rate of 2 to 4 feet per hour. The recovery operation required substantial financial backing, which came from Kentucky businessman Roy Schaffner, a former Air Force fighter pilot and successful plastic pipe manufacturer. Schaffner had become fascinated by the engineering challenge and invested $350,000 to sponsor the 1992 expedition. The timing seemed auspicious. The mission would put them on the ice cap at the exact 50-year anniversary of the original crash landing. The actual recovery process was both technically complex and psychologically challenging. Using a steam probe, an 8-foot steel rod trailing 300 feet of steel-reinforced rubber hose, the team first located Harry Smith's P-38 precisely. They then ran 264 feet of 1-inch steel pipe down the probe hole and erected an I-beam truss on the surface above. The Super Gopher was lowered by electric winch at the rate of 2 to 4 feet per hour, guided by the pipe as it methodically melted a 4-foot diameter shaft. A bilge pump continuously removed meltwater from the operation. The descent into the hole, as team members called it, was a test of nerve that required 20 minutes each way. Team members described the claustrophobic experience of dangling in an icy tunnel so narrow they couldn't stretch their arms, watching the opening above shrink to invisibility while staring into seemingly endless blue ice below. When the team finally reached Smith's P-38 after months of work, they discovered the aircraft in remarkably good condition. Despite being crushed by the weight of 264 feet of ice, much of the aircraft remained intact. The aluminum skin still wore its original olive drab paint, and there was virtually no corrosion on aluminum or steel components due to the preservation effects of the ice. Most remarkably, inside the cockpit, they found the keys that Harry Smith had casually tossed there 50 years earlier. Also preserved were Smith's flight checklist, manual, tobacco tin, and flak helmet. Even a canister of Smith's tobacco remained in perfect condition. Using a hot water cannon, the crew carved out a 50-foot wide cavern around the P-38, creating an underground workshop where they could systematically disassemble the aircraft. The recovery required sinking 5 separate shafts to create a hole wide enough to extract the largest piece, the 17-foot-long, 3-ton center section of the fuselage. On August 1, 1992, after months of painstaking work in wet, cold conditions, this final piece reached the surface. The moment marked the first time daylight had touched the aluminum since Franklin Roosevelt was president. The recovered P-38, now christened Glacier Girl, faced another monumental challenge: restoration to flying condition. What initially appeared to be an 18-month, $600,000 project became a decade-long, $3 million endeavor. The aircraft was transported to Middlesboro, Kentucky, where Roy Schaffner established a restoration facility. The restoration required complete disassembly down to every nut and bolt, an estimated 600,000 individual pieces. Each component was meticulously cleaned and examined to determine if it was structurally sound enough for flight operations. The process was as much archaeology as engineering, with team members treating the aircraft as a historical artifact rather than merely a machine. Remarkable preservation details emerged throughout the restoration. The original tires still contained air from 1942, prompting B.F. Goodrich to offer to remove and preserve this vintage air in jars for historical significance. Most instruments in the damaged cockpit required replacement, but approximately 80% of the aircraft consisted of original parts, with the remainder being salvaged components from other P-38s or new parts manufactured to 1942 specifications. On October 26, 2002, exactly 60 years after its original flight, Glacier Girl made its first public flight with veteran test pilot Steve Hinton at the controls. An estimated 20,000 people gathered to witness this historic moment. More than one veteran fought back tears watching the factory-conditioned fighter soar effortlessly into the Kentucky sky, as if its mission had never been interrupted. Beyond the technical achievement, the Glacier Girl story represents a profound human narrative spanning generations. Brad McManus, the pilot whose P-38 had flipped during the 1942 landing, returned to the recovery site in 1992 as a 74-year-old real estate developer. Standing amid the recovered pieces of his late friend Harry Smith's aircraft, he was flooded with memories of wartime experiences and lifetime friendships forged in crisis. The recovery team honored the 50th anniversary of the original mission by firing the recovered P-38's 20mm cannon at an oil drum, while McManus shared his dramatic landing story with the modern generation of aviation enthusiasts. The moment connected past and present, linking the young wartime aviators with the adventurers who refused to let their story fade into obscurity. Earl Toole, believed to be the only living member of the original 1942 rescue party, attended restoration celebrations and created detailed dioramas documenting the historical rescue operation. His presence provided tangible connection between the World War II rescue and the modern recovery, bridging 7 decades of aviation history. Today, Glacier Girl stands as the most famous P-38 Lightning in existence and is considered one of the finest warbird restorations ever completed. The aircraft, now owned by Rod Lewis of the Lewis Energy Group in San Antonio, Texas, regularly appears at air shows across the United States, carrying its remarkable story to new audiences. The success of Glacier Girl's recovery has inspired continued efforts to locate and recover other Lost Squadron aircraft. In 2018, new teams using drone-mounted ground-penetrating radar successfully located another P-38 from the squadron, nicknamed Echo, buried approximately 350 feet beneath the ice. These modern expeditions represent the technological evolution from the 1992 recovery, employing unmanned aerial vehicles and advanced radar systems to continue the work begun by Pat Epps and Richard Taylor. The Glacier Girl story has also contributed significantly to our understanding of Greenland's ice dynamics and climate history. The aircraft's movement and burial provide real-world data about ice accumulation rates and glacier flow, with scientific implications extending far beyond aviation archaeology. The fact that the aircraft accumulated over 260 feet of ice in just 50 years offers insights into regional climate patterns and ice sheet behavior. The story of the airplane found 264 feet underground with the key still inside represents far more than a successful recovery operation. It embodies the intersection of wartime heroism, technological innovation, human determination, and historical preservation. Harry Smith's casual act of tossing his cockpit keys inside his abandoned P-38 in 1942 became a powerful symbol of hope and continuity when those same keys were discovered 5 decades later. The Glacier Girl saga demonstrates how seemingly impossible challenges can be overcome through persistence, innovation, and collaborative effort. From Pat Epps and Richard Taylor's initial optimism about aircraft through tails sticking out of the snow to the sophisticated engineering required for deep ice recovery, the project evolved into one of aviation history's most celebrated rescue operations. Perhaps most significantly, the story illustrates how historical preservation extends beyond mere artifact recovery. Glacier Girl's restoration and continued flight operations ensure that future generations can witness firsthand the engineering achievements and human sacrifices of World War II aviators. The sight and sound of this meticulously restored P-38 climbing into modern skies serves as a flying memorial to the 25 young airmen who survived their Greenland ordeal and to countless others who did not return from similar missions. The keys found in that frozen cockpit, small mundane objects that Harry Smith never expected anyone to need again, ultimately became the most poignant artifacts of an extraordinary tale spanning 7 decades, multiple generations, and the triumph of human ingenuity over seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Today, as Glacier Girl continues to fly at air shows and special events, those keys remind us that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, hope and determination can literally move mountains, or in this case, 264 feet of solid ice.